So good morning, everybody. My name is Katie Weldon, and I am the Programming Director for the Mississippi Gulf Coast Chamber of Commerce. And I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, which is Ask the Expert Back to Business Mississippi Grant Program with Mr. Jamie Miller, who is with the Mississippi Development Authority. Good morning, Jamie.
Good morning, Katie. Thank you for hosting the webinar. I look forward to sharing some information and hopefully providing some useful information for those small businesses interested in applying.
Of course. But before we get to your content, which I'm sure most people are here to hear about, but some people might be interested to know more about the Chamber. So the mission of our Chamber is to connect, inform, advocate, and develop. And if you have any questions or if you're interested in joining our Chamber, you can go to our website at mscoastchamber.com. And on that note, let's keep the commercials coming. And I'm going to play you a quick video.
The Mississippi Gulf Coast Chamber of Commerce cares about our members and our community. We bring virtual professional development, Ask the Experts, networking, and economic recovery programs to you, whether you're in the office or in your home office. As we evolve, the Mississippi Gulf Coast Chamber of Commerce can be your constant resource. True to our mission, we continue to connect, inform, advocate, and develop.
And so you see our contact information is right there on your screen. Give us a call or go to our website at mscoastchamber.com. And I would also like to thank our sponsors for today's event. We have AGJ Systems and Networks, Gulfport Biloxi International Airport, Goodwill Industries of South Mississippi, Hancock Whitney, Sweatman Security Services, South Group Insurance, and Terracon. And I would also like to thank our CEO, Miss Adele Lyons, for being here this morning. Adele, can you hear and see us?
I can. Hey, good morning, Katie, and good morning, Jamie, and thank you so much for your time and for your information. This is so important to share and make sure that every business that can take advantage of the various resources that are out there are doing that. And so certainly MDA and the state of Mississippi and the legislators were very smart to bring this program forward. We've certainly seen such impacts from, on the negative side, but now with these positive programs that are helping people get reopened and employment return, we certainly thank you for taking the time to share and help the Gulf Coast. We hope to see you soon on the coast.
Thank you, Adele. Yeah, I look forward to being back on the coast myself.
All right, and on that note, Jamie, I think we'll turn it over to you. I think I've spoken enough for this webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Thanks, Adele, again for hosting this and letting us be a part of it. I'll just start at the very high level. Let's start with the legislation. Mississippi Legislature passed a $300 million economic recovery COVID-19 package. They put $300 million into this law. Governor Reeves signed it on May the 20th. And MBA went to work to begin the process of standing up rules and regulations in a website and a web portal. Two important points on the legislation itself. There's two programs, and I want to make sure small businesses understand this. The first of the $300 million was a $60 million carve-out that went to the Department of Revenue. Department of Revenue were instructed to, based on NAICS codes, to directly disperse $2,000 to those businesses that were closed due to a government shutdown of those particular category of businesses. DOR has successfully issued over 15,000 checks, but we know, and they've been receiving emails and calls, that there may be businesses out there that either were coded incorrectly or for some reason, if you believe you should have received that first $2,000 disbursement, I invite you to go to DOR's website. That's dor.ms.gov. They've got a link there that will take you to an email address where you can send your request, send your response, and they will follow up with you. So that's the first of the $300 million. $60 million was through Department of Revenue. Now, the remaining $240 million was issued to the Mississippi Development Authority. We were named the administrator of that fund, and in the legislation, it required that we would stand up a back to business grant program for small businesses. In the legislation, it lists the eligibility criteria for businesses to apply. But I think at this point, I'd like to bring up the website because as a part of the way we're getting information out, and I know many of you have already visited the website. Many of you have probably already successfully applied. But if I could bring up the website real quick, just to give you a sense of what you'll see when you go to backtobusinessms.org. It's a very simple website, just a few buttons, but there's really important information on the website. So to begin with, we've got the 1-800 number. As you begin your application, as you read through the rules and regulations and the FAQs, at some point you may just have a question that you need to call someone and ask. So the 1-800 number for the call center is listed there. As you move through, it's got clearly on the front page the eligibility requirements. This is kind of the first stop for you as a business if you want to determine if you're eligible to apply. And so those 11 criteria are listed prominently on the front page. And then as you get through the eligibility, the rules and regulations, this is where we get into the more nuanced policy and definitions of certified payroll, FTE calculations, other things that as you work through the application, you may need additional information for, and the rules and regulations are there. And then the FAQs, we've spent a lot of time before we went live with the application, and since then we've continued to add frequently asked questions to help inform applicants, small businesses on those questions that reoccur and when we provide an answer for. So it's several pages of FAQs. So there's a lot of great information on the website. If you have questions, I would invite you to visit the website first. And then ultimately, when you get ready, you're going to press the apply button. And so you're gonna go and be taken to a new screen, and this is where you'll initiate your application. But first, we want to establish, for security reasons, we need to establish a user and password. It's so important because the information we're gathering is sensitive information that we have sufficient security there. So there'll be a user and password there, and each time you log in to the system, you'll be given a passcode that you'll have to enter in. So that was an important part of the application. And I'll just stop there and go back to just some instructions. So assuming you've read the information, you've begun your application, the application will begin with some basic information. Tell us what business you are. Give us the contact information for that business and physical address. Then we're gonna walk you through some additional questions and requirements of the program. The application itself is what I refer to as dynamic and interactive, meaning based on your responses to questions, it will take you to the next, the next relevant question for you to answer. A couple of key parts of the application and the program, one of the $240 million, there's a $40 million set aside for minority and women-owned businesses. So for the first 60 days, that $40 million will only be allocated to those eligible minority-owned businesses. And that's a key point from the legislation. Another key point of the legislation, it requires that any small business eligible that has received a payroll protection program loan or other federal assistance through SBA or other federal programs or agencies, that your application will be placed on hold for review for 21 days. Now that's straight out of the legislation. And so if you're someone who has successfully received federal assistance through SBA, when you apply to us, just remember, there'll be a 21-day hold before we review your application. Another key element of the application is the method of which you will request your grant. There are 3 methods laid out in the application by which you can request a grant. The first is just a base payment. So the legislation says that all eligible businesses will receive, at the very minimum, a base payment of $1,500. Now you still have to meet the key criteria, but you don't have to provide expenses to receive the base payment. The next method is through employees. So whatever number of employees you have, you can multiply that times $500 in addition to the $1,500 base payment. For example, if you had 10 employees times $500, that would be a $5,000 calculation. on top of the $1,500. So you would have a $6,500 grant award. The final is a little more sophisticated or complex, requires a little more documentation, and that's referred to as the itemization. So there are expenses that are eligible through the grant program to include personal protective measures that you may have taken to either clean your business, protect your employees, protect the clients that you serve. In addition to that, mortgage interest, rent, utilities, payroll, all those expenses, eligible expenses, are laid out in the application. If you choose to itemize your expenses to calculate your grant award, we will also require you to provide documents that support whatever amount you're requesting. So the application requires the key eligibility. We force those things to be submitted before you can submit your application. And as you work through the application and you get to the end, before you press submit, there's an opportunity to review that information you provided, and you can go back and edit any part of the application. But once you press submit, once you send it to us, then it goes into our queue to begin review. You will not have access to that application once you send the submit button. However, if you determine after you press the submit button that you have made an error, or you've left some document off, or you need to add something, you can call our call center and they will verify your application and who you are, and they will unlock your application, but only if you call the call center after you press the submit button. So just those are key things to remember. Final item to remember and be aware of. And many of you on the coast that remember kind of the post-Katrina of multiple funding sources that came through all kinds of agencies, it's referred to as the duplication of benefits calculation. And it generally it says any federal benefit that you've received for the same expenses for your small business, the state cannot duplicate that payment. So I know many of you that have received PPP, other federal assistance. If you submit those identical expenses to our program, we will not be able to duplicate or also pay you for those same expenses that the federal government has paid you for. Now, it gets a little more complex than that, but just to want to have that as just a general understanding of the program. So Katie, I'll stop there. I know there may be questions or other things that people want to ask, but that's a general overview of the question and how the program flows.
All right, great. And we actually do have some questions. Someone asked, if my monthly payroll expense is more than the $25,000 maximum of the grant, besides our 2 months of payroll expense, do I need to get the 2 months of utility expenses, or does that really matter since the payroll expense is more than the eligible amount?
Yeah, the max expense, the max payment that the state program can provide is $25,000. Now, so it won't benefit you to provide more eligible expenses than the $25,000 max. But remember, we will be reviewing these. It probably would not hurt for you to provide all the eligible expenses you have. Let our reviewers go through it, make sure that we can add up $25,000 of eligible expense and get you your max pay.
Great. And then another person has asked, can nonprofits apply?
Unfortunately, no. This has come up before, but in the final draft and the final bill language, nonprofits were not included. So these are for-profit entities, corporations, partnerships, LLCs, sole proprietors, but nonprofits are not eligible.
Okay. And then once again, everyone, we do have some more questions coming in, but if you do have a question, please use our Q&A box that are below the video screens you see in front of you. It'll say Q&A. You can enter your question anonymously through that or have your name attached to it. And also, if you want to submit a question on the right, you'll see a chat box, or below us, you'll see a little chat box. You can type your question in there as well. Okay, on to another one, Jamie. Will businesses receive checks or direct deposits?
Our program is set up to only send the business paper checks. And so we will send you a paper check to the business address that you've registered for the program. We will not ask you, there's no fee to apply, there's no direct deposits. These are only paper checks that will be dispersed.
Great information. Another person has asked, what is the date of the 60-day deadline for minority-owned businesses?
The date of the deadline would be from July the 11th, meaning we open the application process up on July 11th at noon. So 60 days forward from that date, and I haven't calculated that right now, but 60 days forward from July the 11th.
All right.
I'm sorry, June the 11th. I said July. June the 11th. I apologize.
No problem. I don't even know what month it is anymore. Somebody else asked, why aren't mobile businesses not eligible for the grant?
There's no language or reason mobile businesses would not be eligible. Eligible criteria include 50 or fewer employees, business that has filing in good standing with the Secretary of State, has filed 18 or 19 taxes. So I don't know of any prohibition of mobile businesses that would prohibit them from applying.
All right. And then can a home-based business apply? Example, a minority-owned printing company based from home.
Yeah, same rules would apply, meaning, are you an LLC? Are you a partnership, a corporation? A sole proprietor is still eligible. Sole proprietors are not required to have a certificate of good standing with the Secretary of State's office. It still gets back to your business interruption, eligible expenses, but home businesses are eligible based on the same criteria of any business that would be eligible.
All right. Another question, how soon will the money be distributed?
We're working now, obviously, just to give you an update on the numbers, as of this morning at 9 o'clock, we had 22,000 businesses registered. We had over 13,000 applications completed and submitted. And we've had almost 7,000, maybe a little more than 7,000 small minority or women-owned businesses complete an application. So we've had a huge response to the program. We're reviewing those applications now, those ones that have not received a PPP or other federal assistance. But it will be at least a few weeks before we see checks being dispersed.
Okay. And then another person asked, why is there a hold?
A hold on those that receive PPP or federal assistance?
I believe so. They said this is emergency money, correct?
Yeah, well, the legislature, it's just part of the law. So that was not a rule or regulation that MDA developed. That was straight out of the law. I'm not completely sure of the legislative intent on that, other than there were other businesses that were either not successful or unable to obtain that federal assistance. And so those folks that have been without any assistance, I think they wanted those folks to be handled first. And so they put this 21-day delay in the review.
All right. Another question is, sport and recreation instruction in a CIS code isn't included on the relief payment. Could that be added?
Well, remember, there's two programs. So the first is the Department of Revenue program that dealt directly with disbursements without an application, just those NAICS codes. MDA is not responsible, and we don't have really any influence or responsibility for the direct disbursement based on the codes. I would encourage you to go to DOR's website, visit, and send them an email based on your comments or what if you think something has not occurred the way it should have. But we really don't have any responsibility or to manage that side of the program.
Okay. And Jamie, can you tell us the website where they can apply for this again?
Yeah, it's backtobusinessms.org. So it'll take you to just a landing page with all the information we've talked about. And then when you get ready to press the apply button, it'll take you straight to the application.
Great. And I hope everybody has looked at that website that Jamie has pulled up too. Another question is, I don't have any employees as a realtor. Do I qualify?
If you've got 50 or fewer employees, if you're an LLC or a sole proprietor, partnership, a corporation, if you filed taxes in 2018 or 2019, and there may be a few other little eligibility issues you want to address, But if you meet those criteria, you are eligible to apply.
Great. And then are there any type of businesses that are not allowed to apply?
Well, I think it really has confined itself to what the legislature decided were small businesses as defined by 50 or fewer employees. So the prohibitions about businesses really have to do with their size and making sure that they've done business in the past and they have a record of being a business in good standing. So those eligibility criteria that are spelled out in the legislation and in our regulations are really the only defining rules or what decides who's eligible and who's not.
Great. And everyone, we have a lot of questions coming in, which is great. But Jamie, just in case we can't get to everybody's question, who should they send their questions to if we can't get them answered today?
I will invite you to one, I suspect if you would go to the frequently asked questions, a number of these questions may already be answered. But if you want to, Katie, if you want to collect those and share them with us, we'll make sure that you get responses back, and then you can return those or give those out to the members.
I'd be happy to, absolutely. Okay, another question. What time period are the expenses counted? We received a PPP loan, but are still having a decline in sales.
Yeah, so just remember, this gets back to the duplication of benefits, and it becomes more complex given the timing of when you may receive a PPP and other expenses. But just remember, generally speaking, our program cannot reimburse you for an expense that you've already been reimbursed for through a federal program. I know that timing issue is going to become a challenge for some, but understand, if you submit the same expenses that you've been paid for through SBA, we will not be able to reimburse you for those same expenses. Now, the program begins March the 1st, and so it's any 2-month period. It doesn't have to be consecutive months, but I think PPP was kind of off and running around April the 15th. So you may have expenses before you receive PPP that would be eligible for our program. And then you may have expenses after you've expended your PPP or other or federal payments. So, so there is a way to make sure that you're not duplicating those expenses. And ultimately, you'll have to demonstrate to us, and we'll have a review team that will be working with you to help do that. But just remember, generally speaking, we can't pay for the same thing that the federal government has paid for.
Great information. And the next question I'm going to ask, I'm sure this has happened to a few people, is when I called about the first wave of $2,000 basic payout, I was told that it was too late and the program was closed. I submitted this round of the $1,500 basic grant. Can I go back and reapply for the first round of the $2,000 basic grant?
Yeah. Remember, the first $60 million that was that DOR administered, there was no application. They basically took straight from the law those NAICS codes and identified those within their tax filings and sent directly to those businesses $2,000. So there's no application. You absolutely can apply for the base payment for $1,500 through our application process. It doesn't. It has no impact from whether you are eligible or not eligible for the DOR program.
All right. Next question is, my company is a for-profit corporation, but a subchapter S, which means the company doesn't file a state tax return, but the income flows through to my personal return and I pay state taxes on the company income. The number 6 requirement disqualifies my company. Was this done intentionally, and if so, why?
Well, the requirements come straight from the law, so I can't get into all the reasons of the intent of the legislative intent. But if you believe you're not eligible, or if you think there's one item that's keeping you from being eligible, I would invite you to apply and let one of our reviewers go through the application and eventually maybe reach out to you and determine if there's some way that you could become eligible. But again, MDA took from the legislation, from the law, and built the program of from what the law requires.
Great. Next question. Please define what you mean by certified payroll.
Well, I think this item's addressed in the rules and regulations, so I won't get it quite right. So just refer back to the rules and regulations because we have a definition. But ultimately, if you're providing payroll as an itemized expense, we will need to verify in some way what your payroll looks like through maybe the last 4 digits of Social Security numbers of employees, some unique identifier for an employee, and some record of them working at least 30 hours a week. So provide us what you believe should suffice for certified payroll based on our definition in the rules. And then if you have additional questions, call the call center. I think we could probably clear it up. But it is addressed directly in our rules and regulations.
And to go off of that, so if they are not big enough to have a certified payroll account, can you still apply?
Well, certified is kind of a general term, meaning that there's no certification means that you're providing sufficient documentation that we can verify that your payroll exists, that there's real people working there a certain number of hours, and that you have some history or record of that. So there's not a single certified document that has to be presented. We know that will look different from business to business. But again, you're having to certify, meaning you're going to sign this document before you press submit. You're kind of signing and certifying under penalty of perjury and some other things that these things are accurate and true. But our review team is still going to go back and try to verify based on what you've submitted that these are accurate and correct documents.
Okay. And how long will it take for a non-minority LLC to receive payment with a simple $1,500 application?
Well, I can't put a specific date or a time on it. Obviously, we're dealing with about over 20,000 applications as they come in. We've got a review team addressing those. I will tell you, we tried to automate as much as we can. So if you've only checked for, if your grant method is just the $1,500 base payment, we've tried to pull those to the side to make sure we can get those out quickly because there's less documentation required. And so I believe those would probably happen sooner than some of the more complex applications we review, but we're still talking weeks.
All right. Can I use payroll expenses for March and April for the state grant if the PPP monies cover payroll for May and June?
The answer, I'm going to answer that just with the way I've been describing it in the past. You will have to demonstrate, we will have to be sure that any federal benefit that you've received for payroll is not being duplicated by a payment that we would send you. So it needs to be crystal clear about what we're paying for and what the PPP loan paid for. And so the general answer is, if they're not the same time frame, if they are expenses for a different time of payroll, then the answer would be yes, we could provide a payment for that, but it has to be demonstrated and clear that there's not a duplication.
Oh, I was muted. All right, someone asked, for the entities that received PPP funds that have to wait 21 days to apply, do you think there will be any funds left for them?
Yeah. Well, the 21-day delay is not about when they apply. So you can apply today. In fact, we've got thousands that have received PPP that have already applied through our portal. The legislation says that we have to wait 21 days and from the time of the portal opening. So we will not begin reviewing those applications that receive PPP probably till sometime after July the 4th weekend. So maybe like July the 6th. But you can apply today.
Great. And then somebody asked, will I qualify if I've received other SBA loans?
Well, we're going to ask you in the application, have you received any loans from SBA or other agencies? Provide us what those amounts were. And so the application will ask those questions, and you'll need to provide us that information. SBA has a whole series of different loan programs, maybe unrelated to this disaster, but we would recommend that you provide us that information.
All right. If PPP was received, can payroll expenses be submitted through this program for the time frame after the original PPP 8-week period?
Yeah. The answer is yes, but again, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I just need to drive this point home. the rule is that the state cannot pay you for the same expense that you've been paid for through the federal government, meaning SBA in this sense. So the documentation that you send will have to demonstrate clearly that what we're paying you for is not the same expense, meaning the same time period, the same payroll that you had paid for with the PPP loan. So, and I know that may require some discussion after we get your documents, and our review team may have questions, but just remember, you've got to demonstrate that what we're paying you for has not already been paid for through the PPP loan.
If a business received PPP, will it still be eligible to receive the payment of $500 per employee plus the base payment?
The answer is yes. And so when you get to that point of the application where you're choosing a grant calculation method, meaning the simplest method is just to request the base payment of $1,500. The next would be we're going to calculate your grant based on number of employees times $500. So you don't have to itemize those expenses. You can just choose the base payment plus employees times $500. Now here's where a layer of duplication of compliance of duplication of benefit comes in. So MDA is having to follow two levels of compliance. The first is the U.S. Treasury rules and the Federal CARES Act, which require duplication of benefits through any federal proceeds. And then there's also the state law. So the state law also says that any federal proceeds, any PPP or other federal payments you received, we will have to reduce your payment, your state grant payment, by up to half. So even if, and I know we're getting kind of into the complex side of this, but even if your PPP loan is totally different expenses from what you're submitting to the state, because you've received federal assistance, the state law, not the federal law, the state law requires that we still reduce your payment by half, or not more than half.
All right, let's see. Will non-minority owned business grants be held up for the first 60 days?
No, we will continue to process and review applications first for small businesses that did not receive PPP. Those reviews are occurring now. Small businesses that receive PPP will be delayed for 21 days. So if you did not receive a PPP or other federal assistance, regardless if you're small minority or women-owned business or not, your review is occurring now.
Great. And I think that's a lot of people's questions that I'm seeing. Are rental properties with an active participation eligible?
If your rental properties are established as an LLC or some other for-profit corporation that is in good standing with 50 or fewer employees, and you file taxes and you can show that in either 2018 or 2019, then the answer is yes. The eligibility, those 11 eligibility criteria, will apply for any scenario. So if you believe you meet those criteria, we encourage you to apply. And you know, if you're unsure, I would encourage you to go ahead and apply. And ultimately, our review team will review these for final compliance. And so, if you think you meet the eligibility, then I would encourage you to go ahead and apply.
All right, and this question keeps getting asked, so I will do my best to not repeat myself, but Jamie, does accepting the SBA EIDL grant count against their eligibility for these funds?
It will be considered a duplication of benefit. So just like the PPP loan, any federal assistance through EIDL Advance, EIDL Loan, other federal programs that you may have received other than what we're describing, all those have to be backed out of whatever your grant calculation for eligible expenses you submit to Mississippi, to our program. So just remember, if it's a loan, if it's a grant, if it's an advance, whatever it is, federal proceeds, federal payments, we cannot pay for those same items. We will have to do a duplication of benefits calculation.
All right. And somebody asked, I am a minority-owned business and an LLC. I have a trunking company and just wanted to know if my business would qualify.
It sounds like the answer is yes. If you filed, if you formed your company as an LLC and you've got tax records from 2018 or 2019, It sounds like the answer is yes.
Absolutely. And if franchisees meet all other requirements, can they apply if locally owned?
I'm going to say yes, but there's clearly some tax implications here that may require additional review or additional consideration. That's why I've encouraged everybody, if after reading the eligibility requirements, after reading the rules and regs and some of the FAQs, if you're on the fence and you're unsure, you think you may be eligible, but you're not sure, I'm encouraging everybody to apply. It costs you nothing to apply. We'll review your application and we'll respond. And if you're eligible, we're going to get you through the process. And if not, we'll contact you and we'll try to determine if we can make you eligible.
And if I received PPP support of $9,900 that kept payroll current from March 15th to June 30th, will this grant be used for July through August? We are opening August 15th.
Yeah. I'm not sure I understand the question, but the answer is the same. If you can demonstrate that any payment you receive from PPP is not being duplicated by what you're requesting the state to pay for, then the answer is yes, it would be an eligible expense for us to pay you. But you'll have to demonstrate that we're not duplicating a benefit you've already received.
And can documentation be sent in an email form? Say, for instance, if I pay light bill, phone bill, insurance online and get confirmation for payment via email, does this count as documentation, or is the actual paperwork from the bill needing to be submitted?
Well, I think we would prefer to see a statement or something from the actual vendor other than just an email. But it costs you nothing to send extra documents. If you think you want to send multiple documents to try to verify or document that you've incurred an expense, I would send all documents that you believe help make the case or demonstrate what your expenses are.
All right. And if I have a client that lost 40% of his annual revenue but has no employees, what does he qualify for?
Well, the program's very specific, and this starts with the CARES Act itself and then with the state legislation. The program only addresses eligible expenses. It's not lost profits. It's not lost revenues. We are only capable or only allowed to by law to pay you for expenses that have been incurred, those eligible expenses that have been incurred, like mortgage interest, rent, utilities, payroll, other personal protective measures you may have taken to protect patrons or your employees.
Okay. What is considered eligible expense?
Eligible expenses, there's a definition in our rules and regulations, so I encourage you to go there because it will give you the actual definition. There's also in the law itself talks about eligible expenses, but it's basically what I've already referred to. Personal protective measures that you may have taken to protect your employees or your patrons. This could be cleaning of your facility. It could include masks or other sanitary measures you took. Specific items that include mortgage interest or rent or payroll or utilities are also eligible expenses. So go to the rules and regulations. They'll give a clear definition of what those eligible expenses are, but those are generally what they are.
All right. My sole proprietor LLC operates from my home. My utility bills are not in my business name. Some are in my name and some are in my husband's name. Will this documentation still be accepted and approved for utility expenses?
I would say we would probably question that depending on what your business is and what amount of those utility bills are going toward your business or other personal use. But if you're eligible, submit the bill and let's have a discussion about what could be an eligible expense. It sounds like it wouldn't completely be the full cost of that utility may not go toward your business, but again, we'll have reviewers looking at this and going through that. So to the degree that you can demonstrate what utility bills support the business itself, that would help us. Otherwise, obviously, when the program wraps up, we will have to, this all will be audited from our state auditor, from federal auditor. So we want to make sure that we demonstrate that payments were sent to those individuals that had real expenses, eligible expenses. So we want you to help us make those determinations with good documentation.
Renovation and construction, small company with no employees. Do subcontractors qualify for the program?
If you formed your company as a corporation, a partnership, an LLC, or a sole proprietor, and you filed taxes in 2018, 2019, and you're in good standing with the Secretary of State's office, 50 or fewer employees, generally speaking, yes, you're eligible.
And this question I think has been asked a lot. I have 4 separate sole proprietor tax IDs for different companies. They are all LLCs and file as separate companies under my personal tax return. Can I file for each company?
You can file for each company that you formed as an LLC. Now, ultimately, there's at least a few things here. There's eligible businesses, and then there's eligible expenses. So you may be an eligible business with no eligible expenses. We would have to determine that based on your Schedule C or some other tax filing that you're providing. But the answer is yes, you would be eligible to apply. We would probably have to look closely at what eligible expenses you could provide.
So as to not duplicate expenses for the first PPP grant and this one, are we supposed to turn in expenses for 2 different 8-week periods?
I'm sorry to repeat myself, but the answer is the same, and I know it gets more complex depending on your situation. But I invite you to do the best you can based on the information you have to demonstrate and document to the state, to Mississippi for our grant program, that those expenses that you're providing for reimbursement through the Back to Business program have not already been paid for through the PPP program. I know that can be a challenge, kind of given where some of the SBA's, the changing kind of rules that Congress has done with SBA's program through PPP. But that's the best advice I can give you right now, is to go ahead and submit, try to do your best to demonstrate that those expenses are different time periods or for different reasons, and let us get a chance to review it.
What does FTE full-time equivalent mean?
This is a good question. It's also a definition in our regulations, but basically if you've got a number of part-time employees, let's say, that don't work 40 hours a week or don't even work 30 hours a week, but if you take a handful of those part-time hours that are worked, it could equal a full-time equivalent employee. So if you add those numbers to those hours worked together, and they're 30 hours or more in a week, then that would be counted as a full-time equivalent.
Okay. Can you break down the grant and its amount by award?
Say that again, I apologize.
They asked, can you break down the grant and its amount by award?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, we will, your request to us is you're going to request some amount through base payment, through employees, time $500, or through itemization. So that's going to be the requested amount. We'll verify that that request amount's eligible expenses. We'll back out any duplication of benefits, and then ultimately we'll send you a notification of what your grant award is, and then ultimately a check.
If I opt for the base $1,500, do I still have to turn in expenses?
The answer is no. What you do have to do is you will have to, the application asks and requires that you give us a business interruption time frame, meaning when was your business interrupted? We'll ask for a timeline of when it was interrupted. Maybe it's ongoing, so it started on a certain date, but it's still being interrupted. And then also we're going to ask you the nature of the interruption. So depending on your business and how it may have been interrupted, we'll ask you to, in some narrative form, describe to us the business interruption. But if you can meet those requirements and you're requesting the base payment of $1,500, you're not required to give us any list of expenses you incur.
Okay. And do insurance expenses apply to this grant?
Insurance expenses or insurance proceeds?
Let's say either one.
Okay. Well, you said expenses. So the answer is no, I do not believe that is an eligible expense. But again, it costs you nothing to submit it and ask us if it's eligible. I mean, submit it as part of your documentation. I don't believe it's eligible, but again, it costs you nothing to submit it and ask us, and we'll make a determination if there's a question there.
All right, let's see what else we have. What is needed to get $500 for the employees? What reports are deemed appropriate?
Well, this would get back to certified payroll. So if you're going to go that method and say, I've got, 10 employees times $500, we're going to require that you upload a document providing what we're calling a certified payroll. So some documentation that shows the list of employees that you're paying, when they got paid, and so some verifying document about your payroll.
And just to clarify, if you see that your question has been dismissed, it's because it has already been answered. But once again, after this is done, please feel free to, if you feel like you have a more in-depth question, email me your questions. I'll send out an email after this. I'd be happy to pass those along. So if you see your question getting dismissed, please don't be offended. It was just either already answered in a different form, but I'd be happy to follow up afterwards. Are individuals that you give 1099s considered an employee?
They are not. 1099 employees are contractors, and those individual employees could actually apply themselves for the grant. So if you're a 1099 and working as a 1099 employee, you would be considered potentially a sole proprietor and could apply yourself. But a small business could not include employees that are 1099s in this grant program.
One of my businesses, minority owned, was established in 2018, which showed a loss on income taxes. Does this disqualify my business from applying?
It will not disqualify your business. The law says and the program says we need to have record that you filed taxes, not whether your business made money or lost money.
I have applied and submitted for the $1,500 basic grant. The last 6 months of my business this year will be destroyed, lost due to COVID-19 still being present. Will I be able to reapply in the third and fourth quarter for the same grant later on this year?
The legislation, because this is Federal CARES Act money, and there's a timeline on when the money can be obligated and spent, which is the end of this year, December 30th of this year. The legislation also says that any money remaining in the fund on November the 1st, the governor will have the discretion to redirect or place in some other program. So the answer is no. We anticipate that based on how many people apply, we'll keep the program open as long as we believe there's funds there to make grant payments to eligible applicants. But at some point, I suspect we're going to have more applicants than we have money, and we'll have to make a decision to shut down the application process. If we don't shut it down, it likely potentially would run through October, but that would be the very kind of, I'm not sure we'll make it to October given all the folks that are already applying.
Okay, and I think that's about time for us, Jamie. Once again, if I did not get to your question, please feel free to shoot me an email. I'll be happy to give it to the person who knows the answers to that. But I do request that you go to their website, backtobusinessmississippims.org, right?
Backtobusinessms.org.
All right, and you said there's an FAQ section. So, I mean, go there first, make sure you're reading your stuff. And if you have any other questions after that, please shoot me a message and I'd be happy to pass that along for you. Jamie, I can't thank you enough again. I mean, you're so knowledgeable about this. And so taking the time to come speak to us today really we are so appreciative of you.
Yeah, Katie, thank you. Adele, thank you for the work y'all are doing on the coast. And please don't hesitate to call us if we can be of help. And I look forward to being down there with you soon. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So once again, I want to thank our sponsors for today's event. That's AGJ Systems and Networks, Gulfport Biloxi International Airport, Goodwill Industries of South Mississippi, Hancock Whitney, Sweatman Security Services, South Group Insurance, and Terracon. If you have any questions, my email is Katie, Katie, at mscoastchamber.com. I'd be happy to pass along that information. Thank you all so much for being here today. Make sure that you're following us on our Facebook page, Mississippi Gulf Coast Chamber of Commerce, where we're posting our events that we have coming up. Thank you all again, and I hope you have a fantastic chamber day. Thank you again, Jamie. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much.